All right, so I know I said I was done with Epstein, but there have been some recent developments that have kind of pissed me off. As you know, getting access to the actual Epstein videos has been absurdly difficult for some reason. The DOJ said, here's hundreds of videos, and then they turn around and make them functionally impossible to actually view. And it seems like it's a maze by design. Now, like I said in the other video, there ended up being a Reddit user who put together a website that centralized every single publicly available Epstein video. I made sure to include this site in my sources so that people could verify things for themselves, and now it's gone. The creator took the site down, he scrubbed his Reddit posts and deleted his account, and according to people who knew him, he said he was receiving threats, and the last thing he told his friends was that he believed he was being followed and tracked. And I'm not saying any more than that, I don't think I need to, but that should bother you. So in the description below, I'm including a Google spreadsheet. In the spreadsheet, you will find links that was released by the DOJ. On the left side, you will find the original link to PDF that if you open, it will lead you to no images found. However, on the right side are links that I wouldn't click and that I wouldn't open. These were also released but hidden in some form of way by the DOJ. They're verified justice.gov links, but I wouldn't open them, and I wouldn't share this with anyone. What also bothers me is what I keep seeing in the comments. People are insisting that there's no evidence that Epstein was with minors. People saying that this whole case seems exaggerated and that a lot of these people were adult prostitutes, and that's not true at all. One of the hardest parts of covering this case responsibly was being precise. I was careful in my last video, maybe a little too careful. I was using phrases like young women or appearing to be a minor when the footage wasn't crystal clear because I didn't want to overstate anything. It's apparent that Epstein dealt with older women and minors. And there are videos where the age doesn't really appear ambiguous. And there are also videos that I didn't show last time. And a lot of these comments are bad faith arguments around Epstein that show these people not understanding how grooming works. And there are people saying things like, well, she was an adult, or she chose to be there, or there's no proof that she's a minor. Why don't you unredact everything? Bro, I can't. Let's talk about grooming real quick. Grooming is a methodical process where an abuser, that would be Epstein, builds trust, dependency, normalization, and silence over time, especially with minors, but often continuing into adulthood. It follows a pattern of targeting vulnerability, as Epstein did not recruit at random. His victims consistently describe being young, financially insecure, emotionally isolated, or someone looking for opportunity. Some were recruited through schools, some through friends, some through family connections. The common denominator here is accessibility. The first interaction he has with his victims is a job offer, a massage, a favor, a gift, something that feels weird, but it's not illegal, and crucially, something that could be rationalized afterwards. This gives him some veil of plausible deniability, and once something inappropriate happens, there's no consequences, there's no police, there's no punishment. The victim's brain adapts to this. This is basic psychology. People say, if these girls were really victims, why were they laughing and playing with Epstein, running around in his kitchen? That's why. It's a build-up over time. Epstein also paid his victims. He offered money, housing, travel, connections. Over time, survival and compliance would begin to merge together, and what people describe as them choosing to be near Epstein is really just coerced dependency. Victims are also discouraged from talking. They're told no one would believe you, or this is just how things work. There's NDAs, there's silence and social pressure, and possibly death. He probably killed some people. And there's also a transition into adulthood, which is the part that people miss on purpose. It's possible that many victims actually aged into adulthood while still under Epstein's control or influence, and by the time photos, videos, or travel records exist showing them as adults or teenagers, 18, 19, the grooming has already happened. However, this doesn't mean the abuse is suddenly consensual because they're at adult age. If somebody is groomed at 14, 15, 16, and continues being exploited at 18, 19, or 20, you don't erase the crime by pointing at their age later. That's not how it works. Again, there's a couple videos where I am certain that these are minors, or definitely not adults. There's one with a girl in the schoolgirl outfit, or some people said this was a Sailor Moon outfit or an anime outfit. I don't know. But this is not an adult, bro. This is a child. This is a child. There's also a very disturbing video that I didn't want to show on my last one, but here it is. And this is not an adult. I'm fairly certain that this is a minor, a child, bro. And if you don't agree with that, then I really don't know what to tell you. Now, this brings us to the part that never seems to get any real accountability, which is the people around Epstein, not his actual co-conspirators like Ghislaine Maxwell in a legal sense, but powerful people who kept him close and socially legitimate and then walked away clean when everything collapsed. Take Donald Trump, for example. Now, Trump and Epstein were socially close in the 1990s. They were photographed together multiple times. Epstein was a regular at Mar-a-Lago. Trump publicly described Epstein as a terrific guy who liked women on the younger side, and that quote is real, by the way. And you shouldn't be surprised. Donald Trump was a judge at a teen modeling contest in 1991. The contest featured girls as young as 14, and it's believed that this contest was a front for millionaires to have sex with the girls. However, Trump later distanced himself and claims that he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, something that's of course disputed and undocumented. But the point here is proximity. It's how easy it was for Trump to walk away once the heat arrived and even become president. Then there's Elon Musk. For years, Musk downplayed any connection. However, thanks to recent emails that have later surfaced, it shows Elon and Epstein repeatedly trying to arrange meetings, dinners, and even invitations to the island. However, Musk says he declined and cut contact, and that may be true, but even his own daughter has validated Elon's contacts with Epstein. But then again, why is someone like Epstein comfortable inviting you in the first place? Right? There are actual emails with Elon talking about, oh yeah, the crazy party at the island. I want to go to these intense parties, bro. You catch my drift? And then there's people like Prince Andrew. This one is not subtle at all. There's photographs. There's now video footage. There's flight records. Prince Andrew didn't just know Epstein. He stayed at Epstein's properties after Epstein had already been convicted. He was photographed with Epstein and a young woman later identified as a trafficking victim. He denied knowing her and then changed his story and settled the civil case for millions without admitting any wrongdoing. No criminal charges, no trial, no cross-examination, just retirement. And it's not just these three. They're scientists, academics, politicians, media figures, billionaires, people who weren't accused but who normalized him, who gave him credibility, who kept taking meetings, accepting invitations, showing up to dinner. And here's the part I want you to sit with. I hope it's not normal for you, the viewer, to have friends like Jeffrey Epstein. I hope if someone in your life was credibly accused and convicted of trafficking minors, you wouldn't keep showing up at their house. You wouldn't keep taking meetings. You wouldn't keep lending your name and status to make them look legitimate. But in elite circles, that's exactly what happened. I'm not saying this happened because of some secret cabal or some master conspiracy, some giant corporation of cannibals that run the world, but more simply because of this social proximity that comes with I guess you could say wealth. It's completely structural and it's happening right in front of us. Photos of people like director Brett Ratner hanging out with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and two young girls, only to years later release a documentary about how awesome the first lady is. I wonder what the connection is there, right? People like Howard Lutnick going from denying to admitting being on the island and then laughing in our faces about it on TV.
Did you in fact make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children.
Hosting some kind of gathering of top advisors this evening to talk about how to respond to the Epstein situation.
I don't know. I could ask you that question. I don't know of it, but
even the FBI doesn't give a shit.
There's no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Okay.
There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files
I'm reclaiming my time. I got your answer. You said there's no evidence.
Trump asked
Mr. Chairman, please stop the clock.
Stop the clock. The legislation. This is
time
belongs to the gentleman from California.
Okay. I'm going to put up another document from a witness who called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, because I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI's Threat Operations Center. He drove Donald Trump around in a limo. He overheard what Donald Trump said to Jeffrey on his cell phone. He was so angry, he was going to stop the limo and hurt Donald Trump. And he met a girl who said she was raped by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. She later had her head blown off, and officers at the scene said that could not have been suicide. No one at the Department of Justice interviewed this witness. You need to interview this witness immediately. Epstein should rot in hell, so should the men who patronized his operation. And as we sit here today, there are over 1,000 sex trafficking victims, and you have not held a single man accountable. Shame on you. If you had any decency, you would resign right after this hearing concludes.
So, of course, there's a pattern here that most people are going to notice instinctively long before they could even explain it. When someone poor commits a crime, the system moves pretty fast. There's an arrest, there's charges, a mugshot, bail that you can't afford, a plea deal that they probably don't even understand, and years are taken away from their life. However, when someone powerful commits a crime, the system slows down a little bit. You see it all the time in the news. Investigations take years. Evidence gets lost. Jurisdiction becomes unclear. And eventually civil settlements replace criminal trials. And the story just fades eventually. Sometimes a person walks free. Sometimes they resign. Sometimes they even die. But they almost never sit in a prison cell. This isn't because powerful or rich people commit fewer crimes. It's because the justice system was never designed to treat power and poverty equally. And once you see how this actually works, you can't stop. American prisons are not filled with rich people, masterminds, kingpins, or billion-dollar criminals. They're filled with people at what you consider the bottom of society. Inmates overwhelmingly come from poverty or disadvantage. They're not privileged at all. It's filled with drug offenders, victims of the war on drugs that imposed huge sentences for even minor possession. Every 35 seconds, someone is arrested for simple drug possession in the US. And overwhelmingly, unfortunately, poor or people of color. There's shockingly severe terms here, 10, 20, even 30 years for low-level drug crimes that became normal during the war on drugs. These laws flooded prisons with low-level offenders, while high-level traffickers or even wealthy users rarely face such consequences. Okay, now of course, I know we've talked about this before, but just to hit on it again. So during the mid-1980s, as the US government covertly supported Contra rebels fighting against the leftist Sandinista government in Nicaragua, a scandal began brewing over reports that Contra-linked groups were funding their operations through cocaine trafficking, with the CIA allegedly ignoring, enabling, or even covering it up. Multiple sources, including a 1985 DEA cable, warned of cocaine shipments from Contra-associated networks. However, no action was taken at all. And in 1986, the Reagan administration actually acknowledged that some Contra factions were deeply involved in the drug trade. However, this was all part of the Reagan-era war on communism. Propping up anti-Sandinista forces took priority, even if it meant ignoring illicit activities of US-aligned groups. And the CIA Inspector General report in 1998 would confirm that Contra supply networks and traffickers were involved in smuggling cocaine into the United States, and that CIA personnel had contact with individuals involved. This controversy would explode in the public consciousness when investigative journalist Gary Webb published the Dark Alliance series, which alleged that the CIA had played a central role in flooding Los Angeles with crack cocaine, triggering the crack epidemic that devastated minority communities in the 80s and 90s. Under intense pressure, Webb's reputation was destroyed and he left journalism. In 2004, he was found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to the back of his head, and his death was ruled a suicide. Now, if the CIA was doing this in the 80s, imagine what they're doing now. Which brings me to my next point. The thousands of people that are in jail for years or months, simply awaiting trial because they're poor. They can't afford bail. There's also plea deals, as over 90% of US criminal cases end in plea bargains. Not because everyone is guilty, but because the risk of fighting the state is pointless if you don't have money or a top attorney. Public defenders, the people that are paid by the state to defend you, are juggling hundreds of cases per year, and they don't have time for just one client. So a scared defendant with a free lawyer who's overwhelmed is pressured to plead guilty, even if the evidence isn't all there. What I'm trying to say is that the system is optimized for speed and volume. From the war on drug crackdowns to tough on crime policies, the 3 strikes law. As a country, and yes, I'm American, we disproportionately punish the poor and people of color. And the flip side is that we don't punish the rich and powerful. So what happens on the other side then? Powerful people don't really beat the justice system in a fair fight. They really just outgrow the system. It's an entirely different game that someone like you and I would not be able to play. They hire armies of lawyers, as instead of one overworked public defender, a billionaire facing charges will retain an entire defense team, attorneys, jury consultants, expert witnesses, whatever money can buy. Take O.J. Simpson, for example. He had the dream team. O.J. Simpson didn't rely on a single defense attorney. He assembled what the media openly called the dream team, a coordinated bench of elite lawyers, each famous for a specific kind of courtroom warfare. There's Robert Shapiro, the architect of the team, known for his high-profile celebrity defense and negotiation strategy. Johnny Cochran, nationally known for police misconduct cases and jury persuasion. He became the public face of the defense and reframed the trial around race and credibility, which is really what got OJ off. F. Lee Bailey, one of the most famous trial lawyers of the 20th century, who was later disbarred for professional misconduct. Alan Dershowitz, a celebrity lawyer and constitutional scholar who was brought in specifically to handle appeals strategy and constitutional arguments, and who even later became controversial for his association with the Epstein legal orbit. He was a member of Harvey Weinstein's defense team in 2018 and of President Donald Trump's defense team in his first impeachment trial in 2020, and also a member of Jeffrey Epstein's defense team, who also helped to negotiate a controversial 2006 non-prosecution agreement on Epstein's behalf.
The saying goes, home is where the heart is, but at this home in Boise, Idaho, it's where the horrors were for 5-year-old Jeannie Wright and her 2-year-old sister, Kathy Lee. They were repeatedly raped by their mother's boyfriend, Bobby Giles, while their mother watched and sometimes even helped by holding the girls down.
Did you ever yell?
Yeah, but my mom was in my bedroom and my mom covered up my mouth. I was screaming loud so she could see. She didn't want me screaming.
Did she ever do anything else to you?
On my legs.
Did she hold your legs? Why'd she hold your legs?
Because Bobby told her to.
What makes these cases so difficult is that more often than not, the child is the only witness. And without getting the child's version of what happened into evidence, the state has no case, the defendant goes free.
Sometimes it's better to free even 10 child molesters than to allow one innocent person to be falsely accused. The problem with making an exception for very young children is inherently there is no real indicia of reliability. We know that children fantasize. We know that children lie. We know that children try to please the questioners.
Yet more than half the states now do make an exception in child sex abuse cases.
Well, Alan Dershowitz, who is, as you all know, is quite interested in issues of academic freedom and free speech more generally, in an interview to the Harvard Crimson, said, one of these days I want to teach a course on the phenomenon of taboo. Well, I read that and I called him on the phone and I said, let's do it. I, like Alan, like Larry, have taken some controversial positions, although my interest in taboo was more scholarly. I'm interested in language and communication, and I am, at the time, was deeply interested in why the phenomenon of taboo should exist. Why should there be thoughts that are immoral to speak about, or, and in many cases, immoral to think?
We also have people like Elizabeth Holmes, who built a rotating multi-attorney defense roster drawn from elite white-collar firms with specialists handling evidence, expert testimony, jury issues, and appeals. For context, she was the founder of Theranos, a biotech startup that claimed it could run hundreds of blood tests from a single finger prick. At its peak, this company was valued at $9 billion, and Holmes was on magazine covers. She was compared to Steve Jobs. However, internal whistleblowers revealed that they were using traditional lab machines while publicly claiming it had built revolutionary proprietary tech. Investors were misled, they were lied to. And in 2018, she was indicted on federal fraud charges. Her legal team filed motions to exclude certain evidence on their federal Rule 404, limit what former employees could testify about, challenge the government's expert witnesses, narrow the scope of alleged misrepresentations, delay trial scheduling during pregnancy, seek dismissal of counts, and each motion forced prosecutors to respond to this, and the case stretched over years. And while Holmes was eventually convicted in 2022 and sentenced to over 11 years in prison, the path there illustrates the whole point. Wealth changes this whole process. She was free on bail for years. She appealed. She delayed surrender. The system didn't rush her. That doesn't mean she escaped consequences. She didn't. But it shows the difference between a poor defendant like you or me, who would be processed through a plea deal in months, and a billionaire founder who could afford to litigate every inch of the battlefield for years. Now, I'm not upset that these lawyers are good at their jobs. I'm just pointing out that only the wealthy actually get access to that level of defense. That's it. It's about resources here. You and I wouldn't be able to have these lawyers. And some of you might say, so what? They hired these good lawyers, and that's how the system works. And you're right. That is how the system works. Yes. Yes, it is. So the other thing about wealthy people is they don't wait for police to gather evidence. They run their own investigations and shape the narrative. If there's incriminating evidence, they might find it first and frame how it's interpreted, or maybe make it disappear. You have cases like Harvey Weinstein, which is one of the clearest, most documented examples. Before Weinstein was ever charged, he hired private intelligence firms and PR operatives to investigate accusers and journalists, all in order to undermine their names. He employed Black Cube, a firm staffed by former Israeli intelligence officers, as Black Cube operatives pose as journalists and women's rights advocates to secretly record conversations with Weinstein's accusers and people close to them. After his 2008 conviction, Epstein hired PR professionals to rebrand himself as a philanthropist, an intellectual hosting scientists, academics, and tech figures at his homes. Epstein's team attempted to cultivate elite social proof, pictures with famous people, invitations to prestigious events, which helped frame him publicly as eccentric, but a legitimate figure, not as a serial abuser, which he was. In 2015, he bragged about this wild dinner in an email to Tom Pritzker, which he said he had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Reid Hoffman. And this was a dinner that was held for MIT neuroscientist Ed Boyden and set up by Reid Hoffman. There is a legit picture of this that Epstein took himself. The attendees were Desiree Dudley, Ed Boyden, Elon Musk, Jeffrey Epstein, Joy Ito, Mark Zuckerberg, Michelle Yee, Navaid Farouk, Peter Thiel, and Priscilla Chan. This happened in 2015. On the other hand of this, here's a trick that most people don't realize exists. You could shift a wrongdoing from criminal court to civil court. And for the powerful, civil litigation becomes an escape hatch to avoid criminal accountability. In criminal cases, the consequence is prison and a criminal record. And in civil cases, the consequence is usually just money changing hands here. There's no orange jumpsuits or mugshots or guilty verdict, and there's often no admission of guilt at all, just a check written to make the problem go away. It's how powerful people often avoid accountability while appearing cooperative. A wealthy executive accused of sexual harassment or abuse often pushes for a civil settlement with the victim instead of a public trial. The victim receives a payout, and in exchange they sign a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA. The accusations never see a jury, and the public often never learns the full truth. You have cases like Roger Ailes, the longtime CEO of Fox News, who was accused by multiple women of sexual harassment and abuse of power, which would all lead to Fox News paying out more than $45 million in settlements to Ailes' accusers. These settlements included strict NDAs, preventing victims from publicly detailing what actually happened. Then Roger resigned, but was never criminally charged. Bill O'Reilly, who faced multiple sexual harassment accusations over more than a decade. However, Fox News and O'Reilly paid $32 million to settle legal claims, and each settlement involved confidentiality agreements. No jury ever heard the cases, and no criminal prosecution followed. Harvey Weinstein. Before criminal charges were ever filed, Harvey Weinstein used civil settlements and NDAs for decades. Weinstein reached at least 8 known settlements with women who accused him of sexual assault or harassment. NDAs were used to silence his victims and prevent corroboration between accusers, and payments were framed as, quote, employment disputes and not violent crimes. Donald Trump has also himself faced multiple sexual misconduct allegations, including rape accusations. The E. Jean Carroll case proceeded as a civil defamation and sexual battery suit, not a criminal prosecution, and a jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation. And despite a jury's finding of sexual abuse, no criminal charges ever followed. The same can be said with Jeffrey Epstein. Even after Jeffrey's crimes were publicly known, many victims were steered towards civil settlements. Epstein paid victims through sealed agreements. NDAs limited survivors to what they could say publicly. His 2008 non-prosecution agreement reinforced his civil-first approach, discouraging actual criminal accountability. And unfortunately, this works. Civil settlements with NDAs do three things. They prevent a jury from ever hearing the case. They isolate the victims, stopping patterns from becoming visible, and they reframe abuse as reputational or financial or personal issue, not an actual crime. For the wealthy, this is risk management, and for the victim, it's often the only path to compensation without years of litigation, and for the public, it means the truth actually never fully emerges. We also have cases where companies caught in major scandals frequently negotiate fines instead of criminal pleas. Prosecutors love this route when the target is powerful. The company pays a hefty penalty, promises to reform, and executives actually avoid personal charges. And it sounds tough on paper as there's hundreds of $millions paid in fines, but these fines often come from shareholders' pockets and are tax deductible, and the executives who made the decisions remain wealthy and not incarcerated. For example, in 2012, HSBC admitted that they laundered billions of dollars for Mexican drug cartels and processed transactions for sanctioned countries like Iran. This wasn't speculative at all. The internal bank documents show that executives knew about the violations. So what happened here? HSBC paid $1.9 billion in fines. No executives were charged at all, and the bank entered a deferred prosecution agreement, or a DPA. Then the U.S. Justice Department explicitly argued that criminally prosecuting HSBC could destabilize the global financial system, basically saying they were too big to jail. So shareholders essentially paid the fine, executives kept their bonuses and their positions, and there was no prison time at all. Cases like Volkswagen, who installed defeating devices to cheat emissions tests on millions of vehicles worldwide. What happened here? Volkswagen paid over $30 billion globally in fines and settlements. The company admitted to wrongdoing, but accountability? Only one executive actually faced U.S. criminal charges, and most senior leadership avoided actual prison time. I'm sure you remember BP, the Deepwater Horizon disaster that killed 11 workers and caused the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history. What was the outcome of this one? BP paid over $20 billion in fines and settlements. And they also pled guilty to manslaughter. However, no top executives ever went to prison, and the fines were spread over years. And BP still remains one of the world's largest oil companies. You probably just filled your gas at one of their stations.
To those affected and your families, I'm deeply sorry.
We are deeply sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry.
I would like to apologize on behalf of all of our Boeing associates spread throughout the world, past and present, for your losses. They're gut-wrenching. And I apologize for the grief that we have caused. And I want you to know we are totally committed in their memory to work and focus on safety for as long as we're employed by Boeing. So again, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
In 2021, after investigations into Boeing's MCAS system and internal communications, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a criminal charge against Boeing for conspiracy to defraud the Federal Aviation Administration. Essentially, after two Boeing 737 MAX crashes killed 346 people, investigations revealed internal pressure, safety shortcuts, and misleading regulators. Boeing would end up paying $2.5 billion in a DOJ settlement and entered a deferred prosecution agreement, or a DPA, like we discussed, and the executives faced no criminal charges, no prison time, and the company continued defense contracts with the U.S. government. They got a slap on the wrist. There are even more egregious cases like large-scale financial fraud or public health crises that end in settlements. Consider the opioid epidemic. Purdue Pharma, owned by the billionaire Sackler family, was at the center of fueling nationwide addiction. And the result of this is that Purdue declared bankruptcy and agreed to pay billions in settlements. The Sackler family paid a $225 million civil penalty, yet no family members were ever criminally charged or went to prison. And it took until 2024 for a court to even consider forcing real accountability. Yet still, no prison time here. You see what I'm saying here? In civil court, justice is really just a transaction here. Victims are pressured to settle, even by well-meaning prosecutors who suggest that a guaranteed payout and closure might be better than the uncertainty of an actual criminal trial. Then you get NDAs that are signed. Evidence gets sealed as part of the settlement terms. And the public, you and I, never see the actual record, and the powerful people walk away officially claiming that there's no admission of wrongdoing. It's a very messed up incentive. If you have enough money to compensate victims or pay fines, you could essentially just do whatever the fuck you want. If you accidentally got 346 people killed, oh yeah, you're fucked. You are fucked. Boeing could just pay a settlement. There's no example better than this than Jeffrey Epstein, a man who should have been the easiest high-profile conviction in modern history. Instead, his case became a masterclass in how wealth and connections can shape justice. Epstein evaded justice repeatedly across decades, jurisdictions, and administrations. When serious evidence surfaced in the mid-2000s, it wasn't weak, it was overwhelming. There were dozens of underage victims with consistent accounts, corroborating witnesses and physical evidence, a 53-page federal draft indictment detailing a vast sex trafficking scheme. By 2007, any ordinary person, you or me, facing this case would have definitely been indicted, denied bail, and likely looking at decades in prison. Instead, Epstein secured a deal so lenient that it defied belief. He had a secret non-prosecution agreement, or an NPA. Federal prosecutors quietly agreed not to pursue any federal charges, and this NPA effectively shut down the FBI's ongoing investigation and even granted immunity to, quote, any potential co-conspirators who aided Epstein. In other words, not only would Epstein avoid the federal prison himself, but none of the other powerful people who might have been involved could be charged either, and the entire case was swept under the rug. This would all lead to Epstein pleading guilty on only 2 minor state charges: soliciting prostitution in Florida, which all drastically downplays his crimes. And he was just sentenced to 13 months, and even that is time that he did not truly serve in prison. Epstein was allowed out on, quote, work release for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, from a private wing of the county jail. Essentially, he went to his office during the day and then slept in his jail cell at night. And this isn't a fluke here. This is a system working as designed to protect someone with wealth, influence, and connections. Epstein's legal team included politically powerful lawyers, and the U.S. attorney who approved the deal, Alex Acosta, would later say, quote, his hands were tied, telling colleagues Epstein was, quote, above his pay grade. Now, when Epstein was finally arrested again in 2019, the evidence was much stronger and more global, yet the system didn't suddenly redeem himself. Epstein, quote, died in federal custody in August of 2019 under very questionable and suspicious circumstances before a trial could even publicize his crimes. And with this death, the whole criminal case collapsed here. A defendant's death means there's no trial, there's no conviction, and the investigation is largely halted here. And co-conspirators were never really fully tried. Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was eventually convicted in 2021 for her role in this abuse ring, but virtually no one else who participated or facilitated the crimes has faced any charges. And Ghislaine, you know what, I wouldn't be surprised if she was pardoned by President Trump or, got some kind of deal, but that would be unheard of, right? Yeah. Prince Andrew, who appears in Epstein's flight logs and was identified in documents as receiving, quote, massage services paid for by Epstein, was never criminally charged, but instead settled a civil lawsuit with the victim. And other prominent figures from Epstein's orbit have similarly escaped legal accountability despite evidence of their interactions with him. We've seen large troves of evidence, including Epstein's address book of contacts, flight manifestos, and correspondence, remain secret or heavily redacted. Court and prosecutors have been slow and selective in unsealing documents, often deferring to the privacy of third parties. Many of them, we can assume, are these powerful individuals. And only recently, under pressure from Congress, have some Epstein files been made public. In late 2025, House investigators released thousands of pages of Epstein's emails, schedules, and photographs. These records confirmed that Epstein mingled with some of the world's most powerful people. His calendars showed meetings with high-profile figures like former Trump advisor Steve Bannon and tech billionaire Peter Thiel. Photographs recovered from Epstein's estate likewise show him socializing with elite contacts from Donald Trump to Bill Clinton to Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, Hollywood figures, and even his own attorneys. Yet much of the actual evidence still remains under wraps, and these glimpses have not even led to further prosecutions. And this shows how someone can be guilty with dozens of vulnerable victims yet avoid serious punishment. This isn't a conspiracy theorizing or speculation. These are documented failures. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice's own review found that Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution deal involved, quote, poor judgment by prosecutors, that he should have faced federal charges. And none of the officials who cut Epstein this deal, nor the influential friends who benefited from his secrets, were ever held accountable. The powerful protected the powerful. And the message to any would-be elite criminal is clear. You will likely get a second chance, maybe even a third. Your worst case scenario is far better than any ordinary person's. You and I would be Now, at this point, you got to start asking uncomfortable questions. Is there some type of club or conspiracy protecting these kinds of people? Now, we notice the same names and faces at the top of politics, business, media, and law, and it raises thoughts about elite networks, the old boys clubs, the Ivy League connections, even literal secret societies. Again, the truth is that proximity matters. Power congregates. There are exclusive societies and gatherings for the elite that are real, but they're often over-dramatized. For example, Yale's University's Skull and Bones is a secretive senior fraternity that has counted among its alumni multiple U.S. presidents and other high officials. 3 American presidents, William Howard Taft, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush, were members of this group, and the roster over the years includes cabinet members, senators, and even CIA directors. The society's activities are also shrouded in ritual and mystery, which has, of course, fueled countless conspiracy theories. However, in reality, it could just be essentially a networking club for future power players. Nevertheless, it's sketchy. Another famed gathering of the powerful is the Bohemian Grove, which is an annual private encampment in the redwood forests of California. This is a real event. Every summer, for over a century, the Bohemian Club hosts a 2-week retreat at Bohemian Grove where leaders from government and industry mingle off the record.
The Grove is the Bohemian Club's summer retreat, and its facilities are hidden beneath lush forest canopy extending south from the banks of Sonoma County's Russian River. For more than a century, the camp has been a place where club members and guests from all across America gather to relax. The retreat is divided into dozens of small camps, the most prominent of which is called Mandalay. Among its members are businessmen like Leonard Firestone and Edgar Kaiser, and political figures like Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, William French Smith, and George Shultz. President Reagan, Vice President Bush, and Defense Secretary Weinberger are members of other camps. Richard Nixon is a Bohemian, and so are high-ranking executives of such companies as Eastern Airlines, Standard Oil of Indiana, and Bank of America. For the most part, the men of Bohemian Grove are over 50, highly successful, and, according to many employees, politically conservative.
Every Republican U.S. president since the 1920s has been a member of the Bohemian Club, as well as a few Democratic presidents. At the Grove, you might find CEOs, Wall Street financiers, high-ranking military officers, and media moguls lounging together in the woods. And the retreat famously opens with their cremation of care ceremony, a theatrical mock-pagan ritual involving a 40-foot stone owl, enrolled members chanting, and the burning of an effigy. And yeah, you could see this however you want. It all sounds and looks pretty sinister, and it very well could be. And even beyond formal clubs, consider the concentration of power in everyday networking. Tech billionaires, Wall Street financiers, and Washington politicians constantly cross paths by virtue of living in the same world. They meet at conferences, think the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Many attended the same prestigious schools and remain part of the alumni networks. Think the Aspen Ideas Festival, TED Talks, the Milken Institute Global Conference, the Trilateral Commission. Ooh. And honestly, that's really as far as you could go before you start getting conspiratorial and borderline schizophrenic, because the rabbit hole just goes deeper and deeper, and that's not for this video right now. But yeah, Jeffrey Epstein's story practically reveals every facet of how power tilts his scales in his favor. Once he was out after his plea deal in 2008, he continued to cultivate high-power allies and silence inquiries in his activities, and he moved among the global elite, counting princes, presidents, and celebrities among his acquaintances. For instance, he scheduled a dinner with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. This was after his 2008 plea deal, when dozens of underage victims had come forward. Why would you have dinner with a guy like this? For some reason, Epstein had this social and geopolitical influence, and evidence later even emerged suggesting that he had deep ties to intelligence circles. Investigative reporters from Jobsite News uncovered that Epstein had an extensive relationship with Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and others as well. Epstein reportedly served as a secret broker for foreign deals, helping arrange a clandestine security agreement between Israel and Mongolia, and establishing a back channel between Israel and Russia during the Syrian civil war. One former Israeli military intelligence official, Yoni Koren, an aide close to Ehud Barak, was a regular house guest at Epstein's New York mansion, and emails show Epstein even paid for Koren's cancer treatment in 2012. Epstein donated lavishly to Israeli charitable causes and rubbed shoulders with prominent Israeli politicians. And these are all ties that continue to fuel suspicions that Epstein may have had been an intelligence asset himself. It was only in 2019 that federal prosecutors finally actually charged Epstein with sex trafficking in New York. Of course, we all know the story. He died in his cell in August 2019 while awaiting trial, and officially his death was ruled a suicide, but, both prison guards on duty apparently fell asleep, and the security cameras in his cell happened to malfunction that night. And all this to say, it just goes to show that there's a broader reality here in which the rich and powerful live under a different justice system than the rest of us. Again, when a poor person commits a crime, they are often treated as a danger to society, met with zero tolerance and harsh penalties. When a rich person does something like this on a massive scale, the system finds reasons to treat them as an exception, or a redeemable individual who made a mistake or whose punishment doesn't need to be as severe. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of fucking makes me angry, bro. That's kind of all I have to say. Again, there's an Excel sheet in the description below, and I wouldn't open that up, and I wouldn't go through it. I wouldn't share it with anyone. Yeah, just my advice. But I hope you're doing well. World is gonna get better, bro. Yeah. Thank you for watching, and I'm gonna catch you in the next one. I love you, bro.